Akemi and Clay first met at a dance. They were immediately attracted to each other and knew this could turn into something special. Both in their early 20s, they stayed together through college, and even when Akemi had to pursue a job in Illinois while Clay was getting a degree at Purdue, they made it work. They would alternate between each other, and take 4 to 5 hours long drives every week to spend time together. To keep some excitement and thrill alive, they decided not to live in the house they had purchased until they were married. Both Clay and Akemi had subtle differences in their personality traits which in a way complemented the other. Clay was easygoing and had a carefree nature. He was what you would call an optimist. Akemi, on the other hand, was a complete opposite. She went through life in a more structured and orderly way. She was a pessimist in the true sense of the word. 5 days after their wedding, they moved into the house of their dreams and started preparing for their honeymoon. The place they were traveling to was nothing short of paradise. They reached the islands of St. Kitts and were ecstatic as they gazed upon the scenic beauty you only get to see on postcards. Clay had always wanted to go on a hiking trip on a trail that goes up a mountain called Liamuiga. It was an inactive volcano so high that its peak was enveloped by clouds while it widened down to the base, meeting the sea. It was a very popular tourist site. The couple donned their hiking shoes, ordered a rent-a-car and headed towards the mountain, expecting a very busy trail, riddled with other tourists. However, when they got there, the place seemed totally deserted. It seemed as if they were the only 2 souls on the mountain that day. They got off the car, secured their backpacks and started hiking up the trail. The dense growth of trees totally covered the sky and any light that wanted to make its way down to the ground. The humidity was immense and chattering of monkeys could be heard from above. It was a 3-hour-long hike, but completely worth it. Being the highest mountain in the area, the view at the top was absolutely breathtaking. A carpet of greenery could be seen zigzagging into the cobalt blue water below. The couple were just paralyzed for a moment, taking in the immense beauty before them. They sat down and had some snacks that they had brought along. Several selfies later, they got up to explore the peak further. Clay's curiosity started to get the better of him as he followed a small trail that took him into the opening of the volcano. He grabbed onto the ropes that were hanging from the rocks at the edge of the opening as he moved further down. The inside was full of greenery and a meadow of sorts could be seen. Akemi was a bit more apprehensive, as heights scared her. But when she saw Clay disappearing into the crater, she followed. After a while, Akemi thought it was all she could take, so she sat down on a few rocks as Clay went on to explore. She told her husband to hurry back. As Akemi sat there, an air of uneasiness surrounded her. Just as she was thinking of calling her husband back so that they could start to descend, she heard what sounded like a tree branch breaking, followed by a heavy rolling sound down the path. She called out for Clay, but there was no response. Panic was creeping as Akemi called out her husband's name one more time, only to get a very faint reply from far, far away. She grabbed onto one of the ropes and scurried down in the general direction of the sound. She cried out Clay's name and asked if he was okay. Clay didn't answer. Akemi let go of the rope and slid down, maneuvering through the thicket, scraping her limbs along the way. Suddenly, she could see a piece of Clay's clothing and his phone besides it. She knew she was on the right track as she moved further down, calling out Clay's name. In a definitive voice, he cried for help as his wife approached. Akemi braced herself as terrible thoughts started entering her mind with every step forward. When she finally reached Clay, he was bent over and was clutching his head. She could see that his head was bloody from the back and his neck and back were full of scrape wounds. On closer inspection, Akemi could see that her husband had also been throwing up blood. He had come down a long way from the opening of the volcano and his head injury seemed quite serious. He kept asking his wife where they were and it seemed like he had no recollection of their location or what they were doing there. Akemi was in panic mode. She tried to get help, but both their phones weren't getting any sort of reception. It was now up to her to gather her wits and figure out a way to get out of this predicament. One way or the other, she tried to pull Clay onto his feet. He was on wobbly legs and could hardly keep upright. She placed his hands on one of the hanging ropes as she pushed him on. It was a sheer climb and Clay's legs were just not cooperating. Akemi would try and place her husband's feet on the rock wall to help him on his way up. After what seemed like an eternity, They got out of the opening. She cried for help, hoping to hear back from some tourists that may be heading up the mountain, but they were still the only two people on the trail. Akemi knew she had to hurry to their car somehow, as it would be dark soon. She shuddered to think what the chances of survival would be for her husband after nightfall. She checked the phones again, but still no service. She put Clay's arm over her and guided him down slowly. At times his legs would give way and he would collapse down onto the ground. To manage the steep parts, Akemi would sit him down and slide him forward. The sun was going down fast and visibility was depleting. It was getting hard to make out which path took them down, as there were several others that would lead them off course. After a couple of hours, Clay fell onto the ground again. He threw up more blood and lay exhausted on the trail, requesting to let him rest a little. Akemi knew that was not an option and pulled him up yet again, giving him words of encouragement and urging him to carry on. She was wondering if she should leave her husband back for a while and go get help, but decided against it, as Clay was in no state to be left alone. Just at the verge of total hopelessness, one of the phones beeped. Finally. A signal. It was very faint, but Akemi dialed for help anyway. Her call was able to get through, but the voice at the other end could barely be heard. Nonetheless, she described everything. Clay's injuries, his poor condition, their location, everything, while requesting for immediate medical help. Akemi tried to move further down the trail, even if it meant dragging Clay down with her by force so that they would be more accessible to help. She herself was extremely exhausted and couldn't support her husband's weight any longer. Running out of options, she called 911 again and gave them a rough estimate of their location while requesting them to hurry. Clay was throwing up more blood. In utter desperation, Akemi shouted for help at the top of her lungs. This time, her call was answered by paramedics, who quickly moved up the trail towards them. The paramedics carried Clay all the way down to the end of the track, where there was an ambulance waiting for them. As Akemi sat in the ambulance, she tried to calm herself down with the reassurance that help had arrived, when suddenly, she heard one of the paramedics say that Clay was throwing up blood again. Finally, when the ambulance reached the nearby hospital, the doctors found out the true extent of Clay's injuries. He had suffered from several fractures in his skull and back. His head was also concussed. No wonder he had little idea of where he was or what was happening. There was also a leakage of spinal fluid in his body. A few days went by, and Clay was shifted from the local hospital to a medical facility in Florida. After several carefully performed procedures, the drainage of excessive spinal fluid was carried out successfully. What was to follow was several weeks of rehabilitation and visits to various specialists to bring Clay back to normal. At the end of it all, Clay was extremely grateful that he was alive. It took him close to a year to get fully healed, apart from losing his ability to hear from one of his ears. But the optimist he was, Clay would often say that it was just a slight inconvenience. He was also astounded at how well Akemi had done to cope with the situation. Clay had immense gratitude towards his wife. He knew that had it not been for her, he might not have been alive today. While looking back at the memories from their honeymoon, they both agree that it was what transpired on that mountain that made their relationship so solid and unshakable to this day. It is very easy to lose hope and let fate take its course when faced with such difficult circumstances, but those who show resilience in the face of adversity are the ones who come out stronger than they were before. As they say, whatever doesn't kill you, makes you stronger.